Hi everyone, we're going to get started. Hi. Okay, so we're going to be starting with Andy and Zekiye. They're giving a presentation today on volunteer mobilization and recruitment. And then we have a poverty discussion. Jake should have sent out the link to the article that you should have read, and it's about poverty and how it's linked to mental illness. And then we have housekeeping. So I'm going to turn it over to Andy and Zekiye, who are going to give a brief introduction about what they do at Delta's Vistas and their experience with volunteer recruitment, and then they're going to dive into their presentation. So let's get Andy and Zekiye unmuted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Cool. So I am still waiting for Andy. He is on Wednesdays upstairs in counseling and advising. So hopefully he will be here in just a second. Right now, what we're doing with volunteer recruitment is trying to get Delta students more involved on campus. It's been shown to help retention and help academic performance. So once we get our new Vista, which we should be getting next week, she will kind of take over a volunteer center that we've kind of started creating and a volunteer incentive program. But we'll talk about all of that throughout our presentation today, what we're doing, some things that we have done with trainings and recruitment, and then also some of the issues that we faced working at a community college and trying to get students involved. So I guess I'm just going to start without Andy. That'll work. It'll be fine. So we're going to be talking about volunteers, the outer side of nonprofits. So when talking about volunteers and volunteer contribution, we wanted to start talking about why they're important. Some of these are reasons they're important for us. Others are reasons that they might be important for your organization. So if you have anything to contribute why you think that volunteers are important for your particular host site, feel free to share them. But they typically save nonprofits money. They create ties to the community, which is something that is important for our Delta students in particular, as well as helping with retention and academic performance, like we've already mentioned. For a lot of nonprofits, you can turn volunteers into future donors. And then they also help save time in terms of what more skilled volunteers or employees can be working on who have kind of more of the technical skills. So do you guys have any other reason volunteers are either important for the organization or what volunteers contribute to the community at large? No? Okay, well.
We have a response from Danielle. She says that they have different backgrounds.
Yeah, I really think that that is also important, that especially some of the organizations that we work with as community partners are more or less diverse than our student body. And I really think that a lot of time exposure on either end and the different experiences that our volunteers have or that the people that we were working with in community partnerships or their target clientele, all of that is kind of important in terms of exposure and helping to build connection within the community, but also empathy and human understanding and that sort of recognition of one's humanity despite different experiences.
We have a couple of other comments here. Alejandro says, it helps the volunteers feel good about their work and helps create a positive environment. And Megan says, also creativity and perspective, especially with nonprofits like community advisory councils.
Cool.
Okay. Zekiye, when you want us to change the slide, just say next slide.
Okay. Is there any way that I can see what people are saying also?
I don't think so. If you guys
No? Okay. Well, if they say something cool, feel free to interrupt me and just say what they're saying.
Okay.
Okay. Cool. So our next slide is on volunteer recruitment. Andy's here. Is about volunteer recruitment and where to recruit. So high schools and colleges are a great place to start. Especially at Delta, we have civic engagement courses and service learning courses that require students to have a certain amount of volunteer hours a month or a semester. So getting involved with those classes or clubs in high school and colleges can be a real gold mine for volunteer recruitment. And then also within the community. We have a list of, I guess, methods we use to recruit. We use information sessions, especially for things like alternative break. Those are not particularly helpful at our site. We have kind of a problem with getting people to attend things if there's no food involved, especially because at a community college, kids are here a lot of times just for their classes and then they leave to go to work. So we use recommendations and we use past volunteers a lot. So if someone we volunteered with before did a good job, or if they have friends, if someone in their department has worked with volunteers and has had particular success with certain students, we'll send them an email and say, hey, we have this event, or hey, we're trying to start this club. Is this something that you'd be interested in? We do partner with classes and clubs. So for our Race to College event, which brings 5th graders to Delta to learn about health and wellness and college access, we work with 2 political science classes, and then that Race to College event is part of the requirement for the class. So it gives us 50 volunteers right off the bat between two classes. We train them, and we kind of run everything from there. And then we also, with the Race to College event, get clubs involved. So Men of Delta is an organization on campus that helped with one of the events, the obstacle course that we had at the Race to College event. So we do that quite a bit with our particular host site. But you guys are more than welcome also to, come talk to us or come talk to different college campuses and say, hey, do your classes need these volunteer opportunities? Do your club need these volunteer opportunities? Because a lot of them require that for funding. We have a Delta website that we put all of our community partners up on, and we put kind of current opportunities as we get them from our community partners so that Delta students can use those as a resource. But there's also websites like Volunteer Match. What is the one that we don't have that Saginaw Valley does?
OrgSync.
OrgSync is another one. We don't have it at Delta, but a lot of colleges do. I know Saginaw Valley does, where you guys can automatically reach out to different clubs and organizations through this website and post kind of your current opportunities. And then there's always social media. Andy and I don't run social media in our department, but a lot of the community partners that we work with at Dovia have started kind of relying on social media and trying to build that presence in order to recruit their volunteers and make sure that their volunteers stay engaged and up to date to keep them coming back.
Thank you. Do you think you could explain what Dovia is to all of the other Vistas?
So Dovia is an organization that's it's a tri-county organization from Bay City, Midland, and Saginaw. It stands for Directors of Volunteers in Action. In agencies, whatever. So basically, it's all of the volunteer recruiters from nonprofits in the area that kind of get together once a month and talk about things that are pertinent to volunteer recruitment. So our last organization, we talked about how to get funding and volunteers from corporate agencies. But that's been really helpful in terms of creating community partnerships also.
Also, Ben chimed in and said that corporations were a great resource for community volunteers as well. So just wanted to share that too.
Cool. Anything else? Corporate volunteers are actually really important. We just talked about that at our last OB meeting, so I can't even believe we didn't put it on there. But with corporate volunteers, a lot of times they can get paid. So if they leave work half a day early, they'd still get paid for the full day. And organizations are trying to incentivize donations and volunteer hours. So if you have even retired employees work a certain amount of hours during the year, some corporate agencies will support you with a monetary donation once, I guess, that goal is reached, as part of their kind of mission statement and their demonstration of community commitment and civic engagement. Cool. You can go to the next slide. Andy can introduce himself. Yeah.
I'm here now. You guys started so early. Andy, I'm the other Vista at Delta. I've been here almost 2 years now. Done several different kinds of events with Zekiye and with Shaylin when she was here. I don't know if Zekiye talked about them, but if she did, I did the same thing. Our next slide here is on volunteer communication. And what we are saying is that communication is key. There are different ways in which you can communicate with your volunteers, but whichever way that's going to be, it needs to happen in some form or another. I know with us, we work with generally a younger population, so social media, or even if we can get like phone numbers, we might text people to remind them or to give them details, or emails, even though a lot of students don't read their emails. But I know that, especially in our time with Dovia, that a lot of those organizations have more volunteers that are a little bit older, that are retired volunteers. So if you're working at a volunteer center, you might run into that a little bit more. We don't have that issue too much, but I know that they have talked about some of their solutions to that, which is sometimes you just have to send out paper communication like a newsletter or something like that, or a phone call to remind those people of the details of what's going on. But regardless, it's good to have some kind of communication. And in terms of that, you want to know your audience, and I guess I just talked about that. But the reason why we have, I can't remember these other otters. Why we have the otter next to the blender is because that's Shaylin's favorite activity in the world, is the blender activity, which is basically saying that's kind of how you promote your organization, or in our instance, this is maybe how you promote your volunteer opportunity. You'd have to take a look at that blender and say, how would I sell this to a high school student? How would I sell it to a college student? How would I sell it to a senior citizen? How would I sell it to a middle-aged person who is in the middle of their corporate career? There might be different attributes that you would use in order to sell that to different people. And so it's important to kind of think of that when you're communicating, both when you're recruiting and when you're actually passing along details to the people. And unless there's any questions on this slide, I think we can move on.
So with volunteer training, the types of volunteers you use and the types of trainings you might need depends on the needs of your nonprofit and or your event. So we thought of 3 types of volunteers that we typically, well, you might work with. We don't really work with skilled volunteers. So we have warm body volunteers who just kind of fill spaces. We just went with our volunteer club to the Chippewa Nature Center for Nature at Night, and I had to face paint faces, which was really fun, but I also found out that I am not a good face painter. So definitely not a skilled volunteer. Andy lit pumpkins all night on the trail and made sure they stayed lit. So those are kind of more of your warm body activities where you don't really need somebody who is particularly good at something. They fill a space and fill a role, and it doesn't require as much training, if any. We have skilled volunteers, which might be like accountants or carpenters, things that are trades or maybe professions that you can utilize in terms of volunteering. That doesn't require quite as much training either, because they've already been trained in whatever particular skill, but maybe more training with whatever programs you have and kind of the nuances of your nonprofit. And then we typically use volunteer leaders, especially for Race to College. So for Race to College, like I said, we had 50 volunteers from the two political science classes, but we had volunteers that weren't associated with those classes that were in charge of keeping time and keeping people in and out. And they had a little bit more responsibility in terms of managing people and kind of having to know what was going on throughout the day, where people were supposed to be stationed and that sort of thing. So we had a few meetings with them prior to the event about timetables and what they were responsible for, who they needed to report to, and that sort of thing. So for our Chippewa Nature Center, we didn't really have any training. We just talked about our job description beforehand. We had an email that said what we were doing, what time we needed to be there, where we could park, and that was really sufficient for the kind of volunteering that we were doing. We were only there for a couple hours, and it was kind of more of an as-needed basis. And if we wouldn't have showed up, it wouldn't have been detrimental to the night. They still would have had 4 other people who were face painting. They had other people who were lighting pumpkins. It's just, I guess, nice help. With Race to College, on the other hand, we did a retreat training. So for 3 hours, we took everyone in the 2 political science courses as well as our volunteer leaders, and we went to the planetarium, which is part of Delta's campus, and they have classrooms and things there. And because they're working with 5th graders, we went through CPV training. We went through kind of their job descriptions, what they would be doing at each different event that was happening at Race to College. So we had an obstacle course, and we had an art and a business station where they would learn to count inventory and design their own bike shop sign. So we went through each of the job descriptions, where they would have to be at certain times, and then we actually kind of had them take some ownership over whatever station they were going to be at. Some of them did kind of arts and crafts or functional pieces that would be present at their station, just to make them kind of feel like they had more responsibility and take a little bit more pride in the event and what they were doing at Race to College. And that was kind of important in that case because these students go into the two schools that are represented at Race to College, and they work with them for 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, somewhere in between there, to talk about kind of different social issues. Right now they're talking about different types of safety. So that CPD training is kind of important because they're not just being exposed to these kids for a couple hours. They're going in there week after week. And sometimes the students from Delta are the only kids that these 5th graders know who have gone to college. So that's a little bit more meaningful and in-depth of a training, I guess. You can go to the next slide if there aren't any questions or comments or anything.
All right, so the next thing that we wanted to talk about was volunteer recognition. And I guess it's, well, I'll get to that later. So the types of incentives that we thought of, and maybe if you guys can think of more, go ahead and type them in or whatnot. But food is always a big one, especially for volunteer opportunities. It's nice even if you just have like a cookie plate or a fruit tray or something. T-shirts, if you have T-shirts, sometimes those are nice to give out. We like to give those to some of our volunteers. Usually the ones who are doing more meaningful work or who volunteer often we'll give T-shirts to. Maybe even gas cards are appropriate sometimes. Do find out though if you work at a college, we know that we're not allowed to give those out anymore just based on our services won't allow it. So if you work at a bigger institution, you might want to find out if that's a possibility. But there are also some there's non-tangible things. I'm sorry, there's like people talking in the background I can hear. It's really distracting. So what we have are, like you can use volunteer opportunities to build your resume. You can use it as networking opportunities. For us, we have a lot of students requirements in order to graduate, like Zekiye was talking about with the classes. Maybe it builds into future opportunities, whether that's with the organization you're volunteering with or just with other people you meet. That's kind of part of that networking piece. You could be helping your fellow otter or your fellow person. That's always a good incentive for volunteering. And we also actually created a volunteer incentive program here. It's not too active right now, but we're trying to promote it a little bit more. What we do is we have a tracking system, so we're trying to encourage all of our students that if they're volunteering, and that includes the work that they might do with their classroom, to record those hours, and then for every hour that they record, we put their name into a drawing, and then we draw, depending on how many people do it, we'll draw a couple of winners every month. And then those winners will get prizes. So that way everybody has a chance to win. If you volunteer more, you have a better chance to win, but everyone still has that opportunity. And then we'll also reward the person who has the most hours each month as well. So again, if you have a big organization or if you have a lot of volunteers, maybe something like that is appropriate. And that kind of segues into determining incentives. So the way that you might want to determine what kind of incentive you give, you might want to think about the length of commitment. Is it just a one-day warm body type thing, or is this something that the volunteers are going to be doing over a longer period of time, several weeks or months, or even several days? Maybe it's good to give a T-shirt or a gas card. Also, if the kind of what Zekiye was talking about earlier, the type of volunteer they are, if they're specialized or skilled, then maybe you're more likely to give out an incentive or to give a slightly better incentive to those people. But regardless of any of that, you just want to try to determine if it's even necessary or if your organization can even accommodate incentives, because we shouldn't be volunteering just to get things. So it's not always necessary, and it could lead to expectations if someone volunteers and then they volunteer with you again and they're expecting the same kind of incentive. So just determine for yourself whether or not you think it's actually necessary, but these are some options of different types of incentives. And unless anybody had anything else that they wrote in there, I think we can probably just move forward.
So volunteer, I think part of that is part of the recognition that Andy has just talked about, but in addition to providing that feedback, and especially that positive feedback to volunteers, I think it's really important to receive feedback as soon as possible. So for Race to College, we had 5 different indoor activities that all the kids took part in, and then after the morning events were done, I had everyone meet into one of the classrooms and ask them how their particular station went, how their supervisor was, how the kids liked the event, were there any issues, and that was really helpful because, for example, one of the events that we had was kind of a scavenger hunt, and all the teams were color-coded, but the green team and the yellow team from a distance looked too similar, and since I had only worked close up with the colors, I couldn't see that. So that's something that I wouldn't have known unless I had asked them, and I think it also gives, again, ownership and kind of pride in the work that they're doing to know that they are being heard and that the people running the event actually care about the event and the outcomes and their experiences with it. So saying good job or we couldn't have done it without you can go a long way in terms of retaining volunteers. Sending thank you emails is really important. That recognition is what's going to keep volunteers and not only student volunteers but faculty volunteers and community partnerships going. And make sure that you always know that constructive criticism is welcomed and that you're constantly trying to improve. You can go on to the next slide.
All right, so the next couple of slides we are going to talk about certain volunteer issues. So these are things that actually happen to us, and these are kind of what we did in those situations. Obviously there's different kinds of issues and there's different ways to deal with them, but we just wanted to touch on a couple of them. So the first situation is that we were doing an event and some of the volunteers didn't show up for their shifts towards the end of the event. And it was to a point where, and this was actually something that I did quite a while ago and Shaylin was there, it was pretty much just me, Shaylin, and one other person doing the job of what we had probably 6 or 7 volunteers scheduled to do. So it got a little bit hectic. So our solution was, first and foremost, we just kind of had to be flexible. At that point, it was kind of too late to try to get in touch with people and try to get them back out here because that would have just taken up time where we should have been in there volunteering or kind of running the stations ourselves. So just kind of be flexible and stay calm. Also jump in and help. At that time, neither Shaylin nor I were scheduled to do any specific volunteer jobs. We were just kind of floating around. And so at that time, we just had to jump in and kind of help out with what was going on and kind of take on those roles yourself. I think sometimes it's nice too, especially if you're doing a big event, to not necessarily create a specific role for yourself so that you can do that if that's needed. And then last, we praised the people who did show up, or the person who did show up, who actually wasn't even scheduled to be a volunteer. He had just been hanging out with us earlier, enjoying the event, and then he said, hey, I want to stick around, can I help volunteer? And he ended up being our top guy, so we definitely had to praise him quite a bit. So much so to where he got a little confused. He thought he was working in our office at that point, but we dealt with that later on. But so that was that situation. Those are kind of the solutions that we came up with. And then Zekiye can talk about the next issue on the next slide.
So I have been trying to start a volunteer club at Delta. We set up a table during student engagement kind of fair. So I had a lot of interest. I had probably 25 or 30 kids sign up saying that they wanted to be part of this club, that they were interested in these volunteer opportunities that I had talked about at this table. And I email these students probably once every 2 weeks or once a month and let them know about upcoming events and have almost zero participation. And I think, I guess part of the solution to that lack of involvement, despite expression of interest, is that the kids that come to Delta, a lot of them don't have transportation to organizations, especially off campus. A lot of them rely on the bus system to get to campus, but I would have never known that if I didn't talk to them about why they're not coming, talk about the problem of not having enough volunteers. So what Andy and I did is we had this event at Chippewa Nature Center, which I've already talked to you guys about, in Midland, and we had 2 people sign up to go to this event and volunteer. So Andy and I jumped in and went that night also to kind of represent Delta College. We didn't want just 2 people from our club showing up to just bolster the numbers. And we kind of led by example in that way. But we're also talking about finding ways to bring nonprofits to campus so that it's more accessible to students and that they can kind of volunteer while they're already here. So we've talked about wrapping presents in the halls of Delta College, and we've talked with Little Forks Conservancy about making seed balls I think they do that in January. So trying to get kids involved on campus with nonprofits and kind of hosting a nonprofit a month in order to boost that involvement and circumvent those issues of transportation. So if you guys, I don't know if you have any questions or comments, but we've got, I think, one more slide on volunteer resources that you guys can utilize if you're ready to move ahead.
So this one's quick, just some other resources that you might utilize when it comes to this topic. There is a VISTA blend class, volunteer mobilization. I haven't taken it. I know Shaylin has. I don't know if anybody is currently in it or has taken it before, but I'm not sure how much you get out of that, but that is an option. Community partnerships. So like what Zekiye was talking about, our involvement in Dovia, and that builds us connections with other organizations and their resources and how they do things. So that's another way to kind of find out about that. And then I guess there's also some lessons on Vista Campus in terms of volunteer mobilization that people can check out. So.
You can also just do a Google search of volunteer mobilization, and there are slideshows everywhere that kind of go into a little bit more detail about different resources that you can find on the web and access that maybe aren't so specific to AmeriCorps and nonprofits. So if you guys have any other suggestions for resources, please share them, because I think we all kind of need a little bit of help getting our volunteers involved.
Also, can you raise your hand if you're currently participating in the VISTA Blend Volunteer Mobilization and Resources class? That's good for us to know so that we can share resources with other people. This is Maggie.
Actually, that was Andy.
Cool.
Thank you.
Okay. So it looks like Tyler and Zekiye are the VISTAs who are currently participating in those classes, so feel free to reach out to them for more resources from what they're picking up on. And I'd be really interested in hearing about your experiences in the class and whether or not it was valuable during this year.
I think they're both in the resource development, though, just so you know.
Oh.
You said either of those classes.
Did I meant as volunteers, but good to know that you guys are in the other one.
No, maybe next semester. So.
Is the volunteer or is the resource development one helpful?
I think yes and no.
Okay. Is that the
I
one
mean, there are
that
certain things that there's some stuff about social media that I think is not quite as helpful just because we grew up with social media. But
Is the resource development one the community kitchen one?
yeah. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. I thought that class was okay. I liked volunteer mobilization a lot more than that one.
Yeah, I took the resource development too, and I was hoping to get more information on grants, and I didn't.
It's like 1 week.
Yeah, there's like nothing on grants. It was mostly kind of promoting fundraising events, which I don't do just because there's already another office at Delta that does that. So for me, yeah, I didn't get as much as I would have hoped out of it.
Yeah, me either, and I realized that I don't even really remember what I did in it. So, yeah.
I think a lot of it will be helpful in future nonprofit work. I don't think it's particularly relevant for my placement right now.
Okay. Tyler also shared that from sociology, there are a few scholars that literally wrote the book on student movements and volunteers. McCarthy, Zayed, or Zayed, I'm not sure if I said that right, and Snow. I'd like to share some of those resources with us as well if you're interested in pursuing that. Does anybody else have suggestions for either like ways to recognize and appreciate volunteers or ways to utilize them during the year or resources for learning more about volunteer mobilization? And Tyler also included a great suggestion, which is contacting the local press for recognition with the volunteers. And I know that that's something that Shar-M United Way, Becca is currently our VISTA there, that they do like a volunteer of the month that the United Way facilitates and sends to the local newspaper as a way of appreciating their volunteers. Okay, if you guys keep thinking of ideas, please share them, and we're going to move on to, I think our poverty discussion is next. Yep. Okay.
So, are there any initial thoughts on the article I had sent out? All right, well, I have a quote from that article. What this points out here is that if you really want to change neurodevelopment, alter the environment. So how are we in our work as VISTAs changing the environment?
Can you give like a reminder or summary of the article? Because it was sent out kind of late,
right.
So that way people have an idea of what we're talking about.
So it's basically talking about how being in poverty can damage your DNA, and eventually that will transfer on to generations past yourself. It was a fairly short article, but that was the gist of it.
So it's a little bit of a different perspective this time around and actually looking at the science of poverty and how it affects human bodies, as opposed to like sort of social systems and how we look at poverty, which I think our last couple of articles reflected.
It also talks about how poverty affects children and how that can affect them later in life. So we, I don't think a lot of times we talk about the children that are in poverty, but this article talks about how poverty can actually affect children even in the womb, even as toddlers, and how it can like follow them through life. So, yeah.
And Lauren says, I was excited by this article because effects of the environment on neurobiology are what I want to study in grad school. Alejandra says, we change the environment by helping to implement resources and programs that can help shift the culture and decrease the stress poverty brings along.
So I don't know if this is talked about during the PSO blend, but there are like different types of poverty. So there's like people who recently fall into poverty, or people who have resource poverty, where they might not necessarily fit like the financial standards of poverty, but if you don't have access to the same resources as everybody else around you, then you are in poverty in relation to your community. And then there's also like historical poverty or generational poverty and historical trauma, which is something that we'll talk about a little bit later on as well.
There's nothing else. These couple of quotes are from another article that came out. Actually, it was published Sunday night. And if anyone's interested in the article, send me a message and I can send it along to you. But it says, when families in Kenya were given cash grants averaging $700, nearly twice the amount typically spent per person per year, they reported higher levels of life satisfaction and lower levels of depression than they did before they got the money. Also, studies have found connections between mental illness and poverty-associated conditions, such as not having enough to eat, not making enough money to live on, and having a greater chance of developing risks for physical illness. So I know emperor of maladies is often reserved for cancer, but is poverty the emperor of maladies, and what sort of things would cure it? I mean, is it like the first quote there where we just throw money at the problem and people seem to get better? There's another quote from the same article that talks about how lottery winners in Sweden, contrary to what popular belief is that people spend their money foolhardily, that the winners actually started taking less anti-anxiety pills and less sleeping pills, sort of indicating that they might be happier in general.
Oh, so you're asking, is more money, more problems? Is it true?
Yeah. And there's no wrong answers. I mean, I have a history background. I'm just a hobby geneticist, so feel free to shout out whatever you want. Well, not whatever you want, but Megan has a question. So, Megan, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that more money, more problems. Not necessarily. I mean, it's just so interesting that I guess I hadn't thought of like people. I feel like when people are in poverty, like sometimes they don't know how to use their money properly, or like that was part of the reason that got them there. So I feel like it's probably situational, where more money would actually help where it might not help in other situations. But a quote from my PSO that just like always gets me when I think about poverty is like, when you're struggling to survive, like there's no way you can thrive. But that's all I had to say about that.
That's a great answer, and that kind of goes along with what Danielle just said about a study that people are happiest when they make $70,000. I've heard $75,000, somewhere around there. People who make less struggle too much, and people who make more feel too much occupational stress. So really, that's the kind of point where everyone is happiest. Tyler says, I feel like we watched a video that said a similar thing, but to bring people out of poverty, give them money. That's kind of what our TED Talk poverty discussion said back in the day last month.
That's that historian perspective for you. Back in the day last month.
Alejandro says, poverty not only, where'd she go? Not only money-wise, but like mentioned, poverty meaning the lack of resources or essential things to live by is the emperor of maladies. Even if you have all the money in the world, but you lack love, then you will also be depressed. There needs to be a balance in every aspect of life. So Marissa says, more money, more problems is only true for those people already living a comfortable life. When it comes to poverty, it's literally about survival. They don't really have the choice to spend their money foolishly when it's about either putting food on the table or paying rent.
And Megan seconds Alejandra's answer.
All right, those are some fantastic answers. All right, so talk a second about transgenerational epigenetic inheritance and historical trauma. So transgenerational epigenetic inheritance is kind of like the hard science behind social work's historical trauma. So for those unfamiliar with the terms, historical trauma is the idea that refers to cumulative emotional and psychological wounding extending over an individual lifespan and across generations caused by traumatic experiences. The historical trauma response is a set of features in reaction to this trauma that social workers often see, such as drug and alcohol abuse, depression, anxiety, etc. Transgenerational epigenetic inheritance is the mechanism by which damaged DNA is transferred to the next generation. The DNA is damaged by traumatic experiences and manifests itself as health problems. Traumatic experiences in this case can mean high-stress situations like genocide or enslavement, or low-stress situations like poverty, which is not a low-stress situation as we know, but more acute long-term is what that means. As the article mentioned, genetic components are altered in individuals in poverty, leading to poor physical and mental health. These changes are passed on to succeeding generations. If successive generations remain in poverty, that inherited biology is exacerbated by the impoverished environment. So what then is the span of our work? We often sign on for just 1 year of VISTA service. Some of us are doing 2 or 3, but is it more than just the people whose lives we're touching right now? Ben, go ahead.
Hello. Hi, how's it going? So I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but the other thing that I got from the article is that they were looking at the effects of low stress over a long period of time and versus the effects of an extreme trauma. And it made me think is, it talks about changing, to change neurodevelopment, you have to alter the environment. So it makes you think like how much of a person's day or week or month needs to be low stress in order to improve their environment. So if you're looking at things like an after-school program for kids, or if you're looking at a service for an adult where they get attention maybe a couple hours a week, it makes you think how much low stress encounters do they need in order for the environment to change. When does the good outweigh the bad before the genetic changes start happening?
Yeah,
so those are my thoughts. So the span of the work probably needs to go beyond maybe the minute time we might spend with the individuals. And I think the other thing I got from the article is that as scientists, they didn't say that the end result is that we need to spend money on a bunch of new types of medication. They recognize that it truly is information that's already known, and a lot of the work that goes hand in hand with VISTA, which is changing the environment.
That's a very good point, and I think that we're too quick to throw a medical band-aid on it when really altering the environment, getting people out of poverty in those consistent low-stress situations are really the best answer in the long run.
You know, Ben, your example that you just brought up made me think of the poverty priorities activity we did and how frequently we were debating between like addressing a person's basic needs versus like paying that $5 sports club pass for the kid to go, you know, go during the afternoon, yeah, and play soccer. And then it also makes me think about the example of the dad who was like working a full-time job and a part-time job, and how would he be able to get that low-stress environment or activity with his work schedule?
Yeah, yeah, it made me think of the exact same thing. It's a very challenging thing to try to address.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to contribute to this, or examples? Does this make you think of other examples, either from your service or from, I don't know, training or IRL? Last night my husband kept saying in IRL, and I was like, you can't say that. So stupid. Wow, Cheryl. Okay, awesome. Jake, can you go ahead and read it because you're closer to the screen?
None of us here would ever want to cast poverty as a positive force, but nevertheless, I think it is also very helpful for us not to adopt a deficit focus too exclusively. Poverty causes a lot of stress, but people are tremendously inspirational in their ability to form coping strategies, persist and succeed, even given the worst of stressors. This doesn't make those stressors okay, but a solution-focused approach is sometimes perceived as a more positive and motivating one by recipients. That's definitely true. I mean, this research is in its early stages enough that we could say that, you know, these stressors on people are helping them maybe in the long run maybe become better at coping with these sorts of problems. But again, like, these problems aren't ones that we want to continue to have.
Great, thank you, Cheryl.
Cool. If there's nothing else, I've got my take on it.
Oh boy.
So my take is we sign on as Vistas to fight poverty, and poverty might seem like a social ill, and it is, but it's also built into our biology and neurology in ways we might not have thought of. I wanted to discuss this article because it forces us to think larger. Environment affects our biology, which affects our abilities to cope, which can in turn affect our abilities to improve our environment, beginning the whole cycle anew. We should look at our work in terms of generations, not just our service year. From many of your site visits, I've heard great connections between your work and fighting poverty. However, you're not just helping those who are immediately touched by your service, but successive generations as well. As Vistas, we work to change the environment so that the cycle is broken. A poverty-free environment helps the biology become healthier, and by helping the biology become healthier, we improve how people and their descendants cope and succeed in the world.
Good point, Jake.
Thanks.
Hobby genetics.
Yeah.
I was a hobby doctor for a while, but they revoked my license.
Yeah. I wonder
Okay.
why. Sounds like a good story.
Megan said thank you Jake, for that insight.
Thank you, Megan.
Okay, I think we're ready to move on. So we're going to wrap up our webinar with some reminders. Can you make that go in so I can read it? Oh, thanks. Okay, so just a heads up that our November trainings that are coming up, where one's in December, but I'm still calling it November. The PD that's happening for each of those trainings, for the November 16th training and the December 1st training, we're going to be focusing on grant writing. And for the November 29th training, we're doing a different perspective about sort of emphasizing your best skills during your year of service and how it can apply to later on in life. So because there are a couple of different PD opportunities and we gave you the chance to sign up for multiple sessions, if you want to come to the PD session that isn't on the day where you're coming to the whole training, you are welcome to do so. Please let us know so that way we can plan on you coming and make sure we have enough materials. And you're welcome to come for lunch that day as well. So just let us know what you want to do, but I want to give you a heads up that there are two different sort of key themes that are happening with the professional development portion of those trainings. Also, if you haven't started working on your QPR yet, you totally should, because they're due next Friday, November 11th. Their QPRs are super fun. They're Andy's favorite soccer team, Queens Park Rangers or whatever. He sends me a message about it every time. And then also a heads up that school-based vistas, and this includes college and K-12 school-based vistas, will need to continue serving during the school's winter break unless you are taking personal vacation time during that. And that's a little bit different from how it was laid out at post-PSO, and I'll have some more info coming for you. But I found out from CNCS that host site holidays really only refer to like actual federal holidays and not whether or not the building is open. So you will need to come up with an alternative project or serve at an alternative site during that time. And I want to take this opportunity to say farewell to our November Vistas who are offboarding on Saturday. You guys have all completed a phenomenal year of service and contributed to Michigan communities in a variety of ways while also facing a lot of hardships at your site and in your personal lives. And I cannot begin to tell you how much I appreciate your commitment to seeing things done and doing an excellent job in the process. So thank you and bravo.
Well, fine. I'll be the only one.
Jake clapped for all of you. And I think that's it. If you have any other questions or comments about things, we'll be on the line for a bit. And I look forward to seeing a lot of people at the Partners in Change Conference or on our upcoming site visits, and if not those, then in the next couple of weeks with the November training. So keep up the great work, guys, and I hope you have an awesome day. Okay, the webinar's done. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave to ask in the question box or to raise your hand so that we can talk over the phone. Otherwise, you can exit the webinar and live your best life. IRL. That's right. Shaylin just said that she gives you permission to live your best IRL. IRL means in real life. You can close out of there. Real life. They're both